All right, Representative Seth Moulton joins us here on the Can We Please Talk podcast. Representative Moulton, Mike Leon, Nick Saveri, thank you so much for hopping on with us.
Hey, it's great to be here, guys. Thanks for having me.
First, I want to get into, for you, I was recently on an MSNBC panel discussing everything that happened with Paul Pelosi and the recent attack on the speaker's husband. The conversation got around, far right-wing media and how it had a role in some of this and the attacker. I want to just get some of your takeaways first as sitting member of Congress. Obviously, the speaker. Some of your takeaways on the attack overall.
Well, first of all, I mean, this is just absolutely disgusting. And we're all thinking about our friends, Nancy and Paul. I've actually had the pleasure of really getting to know Paul very well. In fact, I was first introduced to Paul before I even met Nancy coming to Congress. I think a mutual friend put us in touch. We all have our political debates, and whether you're a Republican who disagrees with Pelosi or you're a Democrat who sometimes disagrees with her, when you get to know Nancy and Paul, you recognize that they're wonderfully nice people, and this shouldn't happen to anybody. But that's kind of, what we're thinking about right now. And I'll tell you, one of the quiet conversations that we have in Congress with our colleagues is the fear for our family's safety. And obviously, this violent assault is, confirmation of that fear. So the personal answer to your question is we're thinking about Nancy and Paul, and I'm thinking about my kids right here at home.
Congressman, over the last few weeks, as we're getting, ready for midterms next week, there's just been a bevy of political ads. If you're watching any sporting event, obviously you're in Massachusetts, so during Patriot games, right? I'm in Pennsylvania, so it's Philly Steelers or Eagles Steelers rather, and we're just seeing a barrage of attack ads. What's been just your assessment of, and this connects to what we just talked about Paul Pelosi's attack recently, about discourse, and what responsibility do members of Congress, politicians, elected officials in general have to try and really squelch down that rhetoric so it's not leading into a place of disinformation and getting into a really personal side in the form of attacks, both physically and verbally?
I think everybody in America has a responsibility to turn down the vitriol. But of course, that responsibility falls heavily on the shoulders of leaders in America, political leaders who are responsible for much of this hateful, vitriolic political rhetoric. So absolutely, I think my colleagues and I have a lot of responsibility. And, I was elected in 2014. Maybe sounds like a long time ago. It feels like it wasn't that long ago to me, but when I was elected, I ran on a platform of bipartisanship. I mean, it seems like almost like this quaint, anachronistic historical time right now. But I won a Democratic primary by saying that the incumbent, who'd been there for 18 years, was too partisan. And that's why he wasn't able to get anything done. He passed one bill in 18 years. And I said, we can do better than that. And we can do better by being willing to work with the other side, by not just attacking the other side, but finding common ground. And I've tried to do that. I have done it. I just passed 988, the National Mental Health Hotline, with a Republican, a fellow veteran across the aisle. We never would have gotten it done if he and I hadn't been able to work together on this really, groundbreaking legislation. So I believe in that philosophy, and I'm constantly trying to turn down the rhetoric. But obviously, a lot of people on both sides of the aisle find political advantage in doing the opposite, in turning up the hate, the vitriol, the attacks. And we're certainly seeing a lot of that this political season.
Congressman, just take us through the reality of that, in the sense of you just spoke a moment ago about striving for bipartisanship. Obviously, to those outside the political spectrum, we see the ads, we see what I would consider some of the most cartoonish versions of members of Congress, the most outspoken ones. But as a sitting member of Congress, what has bipartisanship looked like? Obviously, it may not be in the best place as it was when you first joined Congress, but what hope do we have about finding common ground? What's been your lived experience about working with Republicans?
Well, first of all, let me just acknowledge there's no question it's gotten worse. You're right about that. It's a lot worse than it was when I first came, and I haven't even been in Congress all that long. But because so many people have gotten more Twitter followers and gotten on national TV by being hateful, by saying the next most outrageous thing, uh, the reality is that most bipartisanship today happens behind the scenes. It's the quiet negotiating, not in front of the cameras, uh, sometimes not even at a, out in a restaurant, because someone might see you sitting down with someone from the other side of the aisle and tweet about it and question your credibility as a true Republican or as a true Democrat. But when we find quiet times to talk and figure out where we can actually get things done, that's where it happens. When I first ran, and I was on this platform of doing more bipartisan work, I was asked by people, well, Seth, how do you work with someone like Ted Cruz? How on earth are you going to work with a Republican like that? And my answer is very simple. You don't. I've never worked with Ted Cruz on anything, and I probably never will. He's useless when it comes to actually working in a bipartisan way to getting things done. But there are still enough Republicans left. Yes, they're dwindling, but there is still enough Republicans left that you can find who actually do want to get things done. And there are people like Chris Stewart from Utah. Now, he's way more conservative than I or any of my constituents, or most of my constituents in Massachusetts would ever dream of being. But we found common ground on mental health, largely because of our experience as veterans. And we got a landmark piece of legislation passed because we were willing to quietly work behind the scenes to get it done.
We're going to get into that legislation in a bit. I want to give some space here because we just had our live show in DC, roundtable of journalists and some former government officials. We're talking about everything with the midterm elections. Such an important time right now in our country's history with these upcoming elections. All 435 House seats are up, 36 governor races across different states, 35 Senate seats up. I've been playing some clips recently of some of the Republican messaging around the abortion. Gas prices are being high, nothing being done on the Democratic side for inflation. How do Democrats, in your opinion, Representative Moulton, how do they message better on items that have passed legislatively, whether it's on a partisan line or on a nonpartisan line, a bipartisan line, excuse me? How do you think Democrats should be messaging better heading into these final 5 or 6 days here before election?
I mean, it's a great question, right? This why can't Democrats get a better message out? Because, we seem to be the perennial people who are doing the right thing, including for a lot of folks who are voting for Trump. A lot of people in Middle America who, only really get helped when Democrats pass legislation to lower healthcare costs, when Democrats pass legislation to improve their infrastructure, when Democrats support housing and education, which Republicans are always trying to cut. So we clearly have to improve our messaging. I think a lot of this is about relatability. We've got to talk in kitchen table terms. We've got to be honest about we weren't honest about inflation for a long time. We kept saying, oh, it's transitory, it's going to go away. I mean, people who are trying to buy a loaf of bread and seeing the price go up in the middle of Arkansas, they don't care what transitory means. They just want to see prices go down. They want to be able to afford things, or they want to see their wages go up. So I think we've got to talk in much more real terms about the economic challenges that people are facing. I also think we've got to recognize that, not everybody in America is as woke as the left wing of the Democratic Party wants them to be. And it doesn't mean that everybody in America who's not super woke is a bad person. If we want to represent the majority of Americans, if we want to be the majority party, we've got to represent them too. So I think there's a part of this where we need to tone down some of the far left rhetoric, and there's a part where we need to sort of turn up, just really talking about kitchen table issues and how they affect American families.
Speaking of the kitchen table, let's get into the kitchen tables in your district. Mike and I have previously had a comms director for another member of Congress, and something we love to just hear about is the district that you serve, or if it were a state, the state you serve, because at the end of the day, it's about your constituents and what you're doing in support of them. Congressman, just take us through District 6 in Massachusetts. Whom do you serve? What their needs have been, and coming forward, through another election cycle, what needs are you and your team anticipating for your constituents?
Well, let me give you a window into this question by simply talking about some of the constituents I spoke to yesterday as I was out and about in the district. I was asked about this big project to build wind farms off the coast of Massachusetts. And there are a lot of people I represent who are excited about this because they recognize that we can't be dependent on foreign oil. We can't be dependent on people like the leaders of Saudi Arabia and the disgusting dictator in charge of Russia, Vladimir Putin, who are essentially setting the price of oil that we all have to pay. So they're real excited about that. And Massachusetts can be a leader on clean energy, not just wind, but we're developing nuclear fusion, all sorts of things that could literally change the world. But back to these wind turbines, we're celebrating a big federal grant that I helped bring to the town I live in, the city of Salem, Massachusetts, that's going to take some old land that was used by a coal-fired power plant that's now shut down. And this vacant lot is essentially going to be used as a staging ground for offshore wind turbines. But I also talked yesterday with a local lobsterman who every single day makes his living, even in the worst of the winter, by going out and fishing, by fishing for lobsters. And he's really worried about some of these big wind turbines. He doesn't know how they're going to affect the lobsters. He's someone who appreciates the work being done to save the right whales, something that I've been working on a lot personally. But it's really impacting his way of life and the way he makes a living and the way he puts food on the table. And we talked about how the challenge with environmental regulations in the lobster industry is way bigger than Massachusetts too, because you know what? People are going to eat seafood, whether they buy it from the well-regulated fisheries off Massachusetts or they buy it from China, where they have no environmental regulations whatsoever. So ensuring that this lobsterman, a great guy, a good friend of mine, has a future, can make a living, is not just about him. It's also about making sure that all of us are eating sustainable seafood and not just importing it from some environmental disaster that's just too far away for us to see. So my point is that you've got these big issues that we talk about nationally, like wind energy and energy independence and shifting to green power and environmental regulations and how we compete with China. But they really come home for people just trying to make a living every single day in our district.
Representative Moulton, before we let you go, and I was mentioning this to you off air, I'll bring it over here. Thank you for your service. But I know something near and dear to your heart. You've been mentioning about the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline legislation that you passed on a bipartisan nature. I want to give some space here because obviously BetterHelp has been a sponsor on this show. And for people that are out there seeking mental health, we see how it's crept into almost every form of anything relating to not only the US, but globally, right? Mental health and how to tackle those issues. I want to give some space to you right now to talk a little bit about the 988 mental health hotline that you wrote legislation on that passed.
Absolutely. Well, over 50,000 Americans die every year by suicide, every one of them alone, and all because in that moment of crisis, they can't get help. And 988 is going to change that, because now everyone in America will know that you just dial 3 digits, 988, to get connected to a professional who can help you through, who can literally talk you through, hold your hand over the phone through perhaps the darkest day of your life. And the other thing that 988 is doing, it's not just giving people easy access to that help, it's starting to really attack the stigma against getting help in the first place. Because some people know that there's a suicide hotline out there, or know now that 988 exists, but they're afraid to call. They don't want to admit that they have a problem, or they don't want to admit that a loved one really needs help. The conversations that this legislation has started, the conversation like we're having right now, is changing that terrible stigma that prevents many Americans from seeking the help that they need and that they deserve. So I know that Representative Stewart and I hope that 988 not only means that everywhere in America, no matter what time of day it is, what cell phone you have in your hand, anyone can get access to help. We also hope that as veterans, we can set the example and say, it's okay. It's okay to ask for help. You deserve it. You sprain your ankle, you break your leg, you go to the doctor, you get help, you get better. You can do the same for mental health, and all of us should.
Very well said. Representative Moulton, wishing you the best in your reelection here. He represents Massachusetts 6th Congressional District. Thank you so much for hopping on the podcast. Continued success to you, sir, and please stay safe.
Same to you. Thanks, guys.
Hey, thanks for watching the Can We Please Talk podcast. Whatever clip you just watched, we hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you stick around for some more. Subscribe to the channel. My partner's over here smashing the button. Come on, do him a favor. So hit subscribe.